what happens when you blend an aged American wild sour beer with a Saison and then add a bunch of peaches? A blended fruit sour is what? Brülosophy contributor Jordan Folks did exactly that, and he sent me the resulting beer, and then he refruited to create a second beer. So what's the best way to do all this, and what's the golden ratio when it comes to pH? Let's find out. This episode is sponsored by Yakima Valley Hops. More on them in a bit. Jordan, fruited, sour, blended beer. What on earth?
It's honestly one of my favorite brewing passions. It's a lot of work. But it's really not that hard as long as you're willing to put in the work, and you can make some really incredible beers. And I think one of the, secrets of this is fresh fruit.
So we got some footage here of a lot of fresh fruit that you had got here, some peaches. And, I've used fruit in some beers myself, and including some sour beers as well. But I've never put together a blend. So kind of just talk me through at a high level what it is you're going for with this beer style.
Sure. So we're kind of borrowing from the Belgian tradition of sour beers, where we're talking kind of long-aged sours that's more of a mixed fermentation process. So this is not a kettle sour. It's not overnight. It's not lactobacillus at 100 degrees. Instead, we're adding lacto, pedio, Brettanomyces, Saccharomyces, and we're just putting it all into the wort, maybe 5 IBUs if you have a really aggressive culture, maybe 20 IBUs, and you just let it age for like a year. And after that year, when you come back, you're going to find that the attenuation is going to be quite high. You're going to ferment it down to pretty much 0. And the acidity is also going to be quite high, provided you have, hardy bugs that you've added. And so these beers, they take a long time. And there, as we'll talk about, there's some things you can do to kind of round out the rough edges that a given keg or carboy of sour beer might have, but ultimately you can make some really incredible products as long as you kind of know the tricks of the trade.
So talk me through the actual 2 beers that you've got and why you picked those 2 to create a blend.
Sure. So my process is I make a really simple beer, 50-50 wheat, 50 wheat, 50 pills, 100% pills. It's not that important. Maybe not 100% roasted barley, but a simple pale beer, throw maybe 5 IBUs of hops at an hour left to the boil. Last 5 minutes doesn't matter that much. And you don't even have to really treat the water on these beers because the acidification is going to do a lot to the profile. So once you've, mashed and boiled a really simple beer, I add all of my bacteria and yeast at the same time at yeast pitch. So maybe a fresh pitch of a highly attenuated strain like a Saison strain. You could even use Chico. It's not that important because the other things we're adding, namely Brettanomyces, Pediococcus, and Lactobacillus, they're going to, over time, eat the sugars that the Saccharomyces left behind. And that process takes maybe 6 months. You could even wait a year. And ultimately, once you've waited that long, you're left with this potentially really sour beer. And so that's one trick of the sour brewing trade, is to have a blending stock so you can find a blend amongst multiple beers, maybe even some that are not sour, to get a taste that you like as well as a pH that you like. That's the trick. These various laboratory cultures from places like the Yeast Bay or Bootleg Biology, they work and they can make aggressively sour beers. I've seen pHs below 3. And that's just simply too sour to drink on its own. So if you want to make a really good, well-rounded product, a common trick is to blend in some non-sour beer. So this could be just a simple Brett beer that's using 100% Brettanomyces. So to get some of that funk that you would commonly find in a American or Belgian style sour, or in my case, I'll often just brew a Saison and try to really drive the attenuation down. So you're not introducing more complex sugars that could, extend the aging time or ultimately result in bottle bombs. So you could have 5 sour beers blended with like 1 non-sour beer. You could even just do 1 sour beer and 1 clean beer. But the point being is that typically speaking, you're going to be able to make a lot better of a blended sour beer if you have multiple threads to draw from.
Okay, so let's talk about your blending process then, because you mentioned kind of different ratios. You could go 5 to 1 or whatever. So how did you figure out? You've got these two beers here. You've got your sour beer. You've got your saison. How do you figure out how much of each to use?
Yeah, so this is really science meets art because you can't just walk in and say, I want a 2-to-1 ratio, go for it blind and call it a day. You really need to taste and measure. And so what I would recommend is take the threads that you think you might blend. You know, it might turn out that one didn't turn out so well, or you don't think it's going to work for this given project. So whatever you've got lying around, get it all out and get as oxygen free as possible some samples out. So I actually like to ferment in kegs because we can use CO2 pressure to push some samples out without introducing oxygen to the rest of the batch. And so in this example that you'll see in the video, I simply did a blend of 1 sour beer and 1 saison. And so since I didn't know immediately what the pHs were, that's the first step, is you measure the pH of each. Write that down. And then using a pipette, you can start to make little, blends 1 milliliter at a time. Maybe 1-to-1, take the pH, see what that looks like. Ultimately, I'm trying to get a pH around 3.5, 3.4. You'll see sour beers, especially kettle sour beers, that are really sour, 3.1, 3.2. In my opinion, it's too sour. It's not a very enjoyable, drinkable product. But, that's the beauty of homebrewing. You can brew and acidify to your heart's content. So, your mileage may vary, but that's what I'm shooting for. And so I'll just start pipetting it to find that golden ratio. And as sour as my sour stock's getting, it can be as high as like 5-to-1 clean beer to sour beer to hit that ratio. So, maybe you want to dial in the funk or maybe you want to dial in the oak character if you have an oak variant, right? And so you can kind of like take notes and even develop some kind of like simple like weighted averages on paper with simple math and kind of figure out what am I trying to achieve? And at the very least, we should be looking at pH, in my opinion. And ultimately, you can dial those ratios in based on the stock you have and what the blends are revealing to themselves. So you kind of have to like take what you have and start doing the math and playing around with it and tasting it, making sure it tastes good to ultimately dial in your blend.
So looking at the footage here, the sour beer looked like it had a pH of 3.1. The saison was about 4, and you got the blend at 3.52. So that is right at the ratio you were looking for. So how did that, but we haven't added any fruit yet. How did that taste?
It tastes like a really nice little sour beer, kind of, you're getting some Brett notes, you're getting the acidity, the saison, even if it's a super high part of the blend, it doesn't add any sort of off-putting character. Once you get that all blended together, it really tastes like an American sour beer. And so I think that's why you want to pick your clean thread carefully. If you're going to blend in a milk stout, all of a sudden you have a sour milk stout. And so that's why I think it's really important to just be thoughtful in the types of beers that you're blending in. But, really there's a fair amount of freedom. I blended in Helles. You could, blend in a little bit of Marzen for more of like an amber color. But just be mindful of what that contribution that you're getting from your clean beer is if you have such a high ratio. But really, this just tastes kind of sour, kind of funky, but fruit really can amplify the experience, in my opinion.
So let's talk about the fruit, because right now we've got a blended sour, but not a fruited blended sour. So why peaches?
Well, I really like to just draw from local ingredients. I'll literally just walk to the farmer's market that's a couple blocks from my house in the summer, and during the harvest season, just see what they have. So that day I bought a bunch of peaches, and I also actually bought a bunch of figs. And so I did another blend on figs. I've done boysenberries, marionberries, blackberries, cherries. These various fruits, you need a lot. Really, in my opinion, you should be looking at minimum 2 pounds per gallon, and really, and for more delicate fruits like peaches, probably more like 3 or 4 pounds per gallon before you're getting that really intense fruit character. So it's really good to go to a farmer's market because you kind of haggle with the farmers working there and say like, hey, can I get like a whole case? Or do you have some fruit that's kind of ugly that you don't think will sell as well? Because it doesn't have to look good. It's just going to get, become part of a sour beer. And so you really need a lot. And I don't necessarily have an agenda when I go to the farmer's market. I just see what's fresh and what looks good.
Well, the peaches that you got didn't look misshapen at all. They look beautiful. So talk me through the process of now actually getting all of this fruit into this new blended beer that you created.
Sure. So one thing that you'll sometimes hear people say when they talk about making fruited blended sour beer is they might pre-freeze the fruit to break down the cell walls ostensibly to encourage the Brettanomyces accessing the sugars in the fruit, etc. I would say do that if it makes logistical sense, in the sense of you see the fruit and you want it, but you're not ready to blend with it. But there's absolutely no worries just using it fresh without freezing it. I think in this case, I just use it fresh. The timing was right. And so I simply give it a quick rinse in the sink, and then it goes into the fermenter. Now, at the homebrew scale, especially with something like a really large peach, you might as well break it up some. You could chop it with a knife or whatever, but another way is just use your hands and rip it apart. You can de-seed it if you want, but with peaches, that peach seed adds some really interesting kind of, like, you'll hear people say, like, almond notes. There was a brewery that sadly closed, one of the kind of archetypes of American sour beer, Cascade Barrel House here in Portland, Oregon. And they even made a peach seed beer called Noyo. And so there is precedent with these peach seeds. I think that, like, at a crazy high level, there might be some sort of toxin concern, but the Belgian lambic producers, they're not ripping out the seeds. It's going to be fine. Just don't eat the seeds after the fermentation, and so, just rip them apart and throw them in. And so that's why I really like a wide mouth fermenter, because if you're using a carboy, it's actually really hard to get the stuff in the hole. Glass carboys are really hard, and then it can be hard to get it out. So a keg, a wide mouth fermenter, those are really helpful to get the fruit in. So break it up, toss it in, and you want to rack on top of that, because you do not want to introduce oxygen to the extent that you can avoid it. And so you wouldn't ever want to throw fruit into a filled carboy, because you're going to have to way too much splashing. And then also you might turn out that you don't have room for it all. So once it's all at the bottom, you can then fill to the brim. And I like to go pretty close to the top and then attach a blow-off tube, because again, I want to mitigate oxygen exposure. So by limiting the amount of headspace, you're going to need some, because there's going to be expansion. And that's why the blow-off tube is necessary, because inevitably, I'm going too close to the sun, as it were. But this is enabling me to kind of minimize the headspace, maximize the fruit contact, and avoid any sort of oxidation of the beer, which could result in gross things like vinegar flavors, things we do not want in our sour beer. So keeping oxygen out is absolutely paramount with this style.
So you've introduced a ton of new sugars into the beer. Now, did you think that this was going to restart fermentation, or at this point the beers were kind of already done?
Oh yeah, you're going to see a very vigorous re-fermentation. And if you are working with threads that are particularly old, you could consider pitching new Saccharomyces to make sure that that re-fermentation occurs. But generally speaking, I haven't found that to be a problem, especially when you're blending in fresh beer. There's enough Saccharomyces present to ferment that stuff out, because we don't want bottle bombs. If you're kegging, it's obviously less of a concern, but I'm a big proponent for traditional bottle conditioning of Belgian beers and sour beers. I think that, one, it's really hard to get through 5 gallons of sour beer, and it would last, forever ostensibly. But it's just really nice to have this beautiful package. You can get way more carbonation, which I think is important for the style. And for that reason, you want to make sure that you're not creating bottle bombs on the back end. And so giving it enough time for that re-fermentation to occur, as well as some additional acidification that typically happens when we do a fruiting process. And so in this particular batch that we're talking about in this video, we saw a 0.1 pH drop from pre-fruiting blend to post-fruiting. And so that's why I'm shooting a little higher on my blend, accounting for the inevitable decrease in pH that follows the fruiting and additional attenuation in that fruiting step.
Right, yeah. The blended beer started at 3.5 and it came out the other end at 3.4. So how long did the beer sit on the fruit?
You can just go for like 6 weeks or so. You could go 2 months. You don't need to wait 3 years. The fruit is extracted fairly quickly. So for your first fruiting attempt, after 6 weeks, 3 months, go off to bottles.
Well, Jordan has sent me this beer to try, and it's been sitting in my fridge. I cannot wait to try this. So we'll get to that. But before we do, a quick word on today's sponsor, and that is Yakima Valley Hops. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers from around the world. I'm using Yakima Valley Hops in every batch I brew, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic and many more. Homebrewers can select specific crop years, and most hops come in 2, 8, and 16-ounce packages. Head over to yakimavalleyhops.com to see everything they have to offer. All right, Jordan, how about we crack open some beers?
Let's do it.
Okay, so I got my beer.
That one too.
All right,
You got a proper glassware for it?
Absolutely. Hey, matching. I love it. Okay.
So with any sour beer, homebrewed or not, that's mixed fermentation, bottled condition, you run the risk of a gusher. Now, hopefully it's not going to explode in front of us. And that's why we do everything we can to make sure that it's fully attenuated prior to going into package. But nonetheless, often you'll get a little bit of creep in the bottle. So what I'm going to recommend is have a glass and maybe even a towel immediately ready. And as soon as you open it, be ready to pour it.
You know, I've got a little brewing bucket here to open it in.
Hopefully we don't, it's not too bad. All right, you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, I got way more head than you. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, I think most of mine is in the bucket.
All right, well, so I'm seeing, pretty orange, really pale, really nice lacing on mine. What do you smell?
Just opening the top, suddenly a really strong sweet fruit, peachy smell. It's just, not having to sniff it, just the whole room smells like that now, which is fantastic. So
I get a little bit of funk and about, an appropriate level of Brettanomyces funk in there.
Yeah, just a touch.
Mm-hmm.
How old is this beer at this point?
This has been in the bottle for like 8 months.
Okay, but of course it's a blend of existing beers. So
we could call it 1.5 years old.
All right. Okay. Well, 1.5 years later, get to try this thing. So cheers, Jordan.
For the labors.
Oh, that's so good. So it is a touch sour, but nothing crazy, not puckery sour at all.
It is 3.4 is sour.
Yeah.
And not to brag, but I've had a little bit of success in competition with sour beer specifically. I'm not competing anymore, but when I was competing here in Oregon, I would clean up in the sour categories. I don't think there's that many people, at least there weren't a few years ago, that were dealing with all the blending and the fruiting and all that stuff. So I think the process gives me a little bit of a leg up. But I ultimately went on to win gold in NHC in the American wild fruited sour category. And I think that really part of it is just balancing the pH. People don't want to drink something that's ripping the enamel off your teeth. It's really enjoyable to have a definitely tart, but still drinkable fruited sour experience.
Yeah, exactly. It's so well balanced. It is definitely still tart and sour, but not to the extent where it's like, I feel like I could drink this whole thing and not be like thinking I'm going to be having stomach problems the next day. So that's the sourness part of it. And of course, the other part is the fruiting as well, which is, as I mentioned, the aroma is super present, and it's also got, I would say, a notable fruit flavor to it as well. But I was wondering if I was going to get like peach juice, very overpowering, and it's not like that at all.
Yeah, so this one has a fruiting rate of around 2 pounds per gallon. And in my tasting notes, when I opened the first bottle, I thought, I want more peach character. So I think I'll be going up to 3 or 4 pounds per gallon for my next batch. It's still great. There's still definitely fruit present, but I could take more.
Now, Jordan, you and I, we did a video about the party gal technique, where you basically brew a big beer and then you take the spent grains and you brew another beer with it. I believe that you've done something similar with this one and called it refruiting. So talk me through that.
Yeah, so you'll see this in both American sour beer producers as well as in Belgium, is sometimes they'll actually put another blend of sour beer onto the fruit after racking off of it for that first bottling run. There's a lot of sugar and a lot of flavor still left in these real whole fruits following that initial fruit re-fermentation. And so it's a really good way to stretch the fruit and get another sour beer out of just a single batch. You know, fruit's a really expensive ingredient for this type of beer. Really dramatically, exponentially increases the cost for a given beer. Might as well get a couple out of it. So what I did is on that bottling day, I had sour stock, I had clean stock ready, and I just did the same thing, got the pipettes out, figured out my blend, and put a new blend on the peaches. And for the second fruiting, I actually let this one sit for like maybe 3 months, just because I wanted to make sure that enough fruit flavor was extracted, because, you know, ostensibly there's a little less available to grab on that second fruiting. And I sent you a bottle.
Yeah, this is here. So is this the same two beers, the same American Wild and Saison repurposed?
It is the same. It is the same sour blend. I'm sorry, sour stock. But the clean beer was different because, you know, months had passed and I didn't have freshly fermented, not carbonated Saison ready to go. So I think I actually, in anticipation, brewed a simple Saison. And one of the reasons I like to brew Saison is you can brew it like it's a standard Saison you intend to drink. And because when you do your ratios, it's like, I only need 3 gallons of Saison. What I'm going to do with the other 2, then you can just like keg those and drink them like a normal Saison.
Yeah. Well, okay, we've got to give this a try then. So essentially, this is very similar mix. It's the same sour stock, similar style beer to blend it with. I'm really curious to see what the difference is here. So let me get my bucket again, just in case we have another gusher. Okay, let's give this a go.
Not seeing the same level of gushing. Oh, there it goes.
Oh yeah, a little bit.
I am so mesmerized by the differences in head that we're getting.
Yeah, that's crazy. Again, mine is, I mean, it's there's a lot of bubbles coming up, but not much in the way of actual head formation.
I wonder if maybe it's just pouring technique. I don't know.
I wouldn't rule it out. Okay, so let's put these side by side. Pretty similar in color. Maybe the refruited one touch darker for me.
Yeah, and it could be a difference in the grist that was used on that particular batch. You'd expect to, you know, get less fruit character and less fruit color from the second fruiting. And when you use like a red fruit like cherries, the second fruiting is way paler compared to the first one.
That makes sense. Now, there is a difference in aroma as well. It is also a kind of fruity smelling beer, but much more muted than the first one.
Yeah, I don't even know if I would. The first one, it's like, that's peaches without a doubt. The second one, kind of just like generic stone fruit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I would have a difficulty calling out that this is peach.
Cheers.
Cheers. It's a very different beer. So I am picking up a different kind of sourness in this one, and much less on the fruit side of it. It tastes, I don't know, kind of a softer sourness. I don't know if this actually was the same kind of pH as the other one. I would imagine that perhaps the first beer was actually slightly more sour than the second.
So I think some of the fruit character is aged a little bit more aggressively compared to the heavily first fruited one. But I think it's still a lovely little beer. And I think for those that don't want to drink, you know, carbonated acidic fruit juice, this is, you know, maybe more up their alley. And yeah, I think ultimately I'm glad that I gave it a second go.
Yeah, this is it is very different. It is more of a softer, rounder, I would say a bit easier drinking than the first one.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. And, you know, you could get some variation with batch to batch, even on the production side too, right? You add the same exact bacteria mix into 2 carboys that were right next to each other. They're temperature controlled to the same exact temperature. They're going to taste different. They're going to have different pHs. Sour beer is wacky. It's really unpredictable, and it's part of the fun.
Well, Jordan, anytime that you've spent 18 months brewing a beer and you want to send me a sample, you got my address anytime. This is absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for sending these over and for talking us through this process.